Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on football after the Falcons lose on Sunday Night Football to the San Francisco 49ers 20-10. And that is a really terrible loss to take. And especially in the way that it happened, just to only score 10 points against a San Francisco defense that was in the state that it is without Nick Bosa, without Fred Warner, without so many pieces of that secondary, and they even lost another corner during this game. And for the passing attack to be as inefficient as it was, to be as sporadic as it was, Michael Penix with another game on the road where he just does not look comfortable, does not look like he's in a flow, in a rhythm. It felt like the offense was a little slow again, a lot more snaps it felt like when they're on the road. And I don't know if this is down just to crowd noise or whatever, but a lot of snaps again coming late in the play clock, which it's not that that's necessarily always a terrible thing, but ultimately at one point in the game it does cause a delay of games. So there was just a lot of issues on that side of the ball where it feels like this Falcons offense was making a lot of progress, and that this would be a good test to see if they could go on the road against, frankly, a not so tough opponent, like a defensive opponent. Obviously, the San Francisco 49ers are, a really, well-run organization with top-class coaching, especially on that defensive side of the football, which we'll talk more about in a second. But it just felt like this was a great opportunity for them to go out on the road and prove something that they haven't really shown, at least this season, and it did not come to pass. Michael Penix struggled once again. The offensive line really struggled. Bijan Robinson couldn't really get much going. He averaged only 2.9 yards per carry. Let's just start talking about the offense, because we'll kind of talk about the offense, defense, and special teams, and then get out of here. Just again, reacting to this game, I really just thought that, as far as the offensive side of the football goes, I kind of boil it down to Robert Saleh beats Zac Robinson tonight. I thought that the pressure packages that Saleh was bringing were really effective, even though he didn't have, these top quality players. He got a little bit aggressive. They really kind of packed the box. And not only did that help in stopping the run, but I think that it put a lot of pressure on Michael Penix to be precise in some man coverage situations. And, sometimes it's not like he was awful. It wasn't a Carolina performance necessarily, but it certainly wasn't a winning performance from him either. He just needed to be a lot better. It was just not good enough. And I thought that the pressure packages that Saleh was bringing was really affecting this team overall. We saw, Elijah Wilkinson struggling, Matthew Bergeron struggling once again in pass protection. Jake Matthews does make the start, and he held up very well. But ultimately, it just was not good enough for this Falcons offense. And, to only have 10 points in this game, I mean, that is brutal. You figured that if the Falcons were going to lose this game, it was going to be more along the lines of, that Kyle Shanahan's able to scheme something up, and they're able, and they maybe lose like 27-24 or something like that, not getting held to 10 points. I mean, that is just unacceptable in the NFL for this offense that was supposed to be one that was, one of the better offenses in the league. That was kind of the formula for this Falcons team to ultimately be successful this year. And this loss drops them back to 3-3, which when you look over, the schedule and how you may have thought about it coming into the season, you would think, okay, well, 3-3, you definitely take that. I think a lot of people were taking 3-3 coming into the year when you look at those first 6 games. But when you look at how they've actually transpired, Carolina's obviously a game you feel like you should be winning every single time you play it. And then, San Francisco, when they were in the state that they're in, it felt like a game that this Falcons team honestly should have been winning, especially when you looked like you did coming off that game against the Bills on Monday Night Football. That was such a big win for them. And one of the things that we've talked about on this show, I've talked about it on 92.9 The Game, was that the challenge for this Falcons football team going forward and this season is not, can they get up for a big game and beat a big time opponent? Like, they've proven that this year. They proved it last year when they beat the Eagles on Monday Night Football, although, they were very lucky to have a chance to win that game. But, ultimately they have come up big against big opponents over the last few years. It's been the ability or lack thereof to be able to come back from those big wins and keep, and not only just keep the performance at a certain level, but actually, can you elevate your performance? Can you elevate your performance week to week? And I think back to that Atlanta, that Falcons Super Bowl run that they made in 2016, and definitely down the second half of that season, it felt like the performance just got better and better and better, and they were building. Zac Robinson has talked about this offense kind of building it as the season goes on. It felt like that was a team that was just building, 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 and ascending as the season went on. And none of these Falcons teams feel like they've been doing that the last several years. And this was a great opportunity for them to prove that they could kind of build on what they did at home against Buffalo and against the Commanders before the bye. But ultimately, it serves as a disappointment for this team to only score 10 points against the San Francisco 49ers. You'll probably hear me repeat that a lot in this episode because I'm still, frankly, kind of shocked and disturbed by the fact that happened. Again, Bijan Robinson, only 2.9 yards per carry in the run game tonight. It's not like he wasn't looking elusive or anything. There was just, he was bottled up in so many instances. Several times he was caught behind the line of scrimmage for losses. And that set the Falcons back in the chains. And, sometimes it just felt very telegraphed basically by this offense that the ball was going to Bijan in certain situations. And San Francisco, like I said, they were aggressive and they keyed in on these tendencies and I think what they expected to happen. And were they always, did the Falcons ever get their way with them? Yes, the Falcons did at times have their moments, but ultimately San Francisco and this Robert Saleh game plan for this game was enough for them to win. And so it's just obviously bitterly disappointing. One of the big issues for this team was Michael Penix. He was just not as efficient as you need him to be. 21 for 38 for 241 yards in this game. Had some chunk plays that I think even just kind of inflate that number when you talk about he had 57 yards passing on 2 plays right at the end of the first half. A half that should have ended in a field goal attempt, but Michael Penix picks up a intentional grounding call and just chalk it up to inexperience or whatever, just a brain fart on Penix's part, but throws a ball away from inside the pocket. And ultimately, that first half ends without a field goal, so there's lost points there, and it just felt kind of bungled at that point because he did well. I mean, I don't want to say like the 57 yards he had passing weren't deserved to get them down there. They were, but ultimately, you felt like you should have gotten more there. And so, that 57 yards, which just kind of happens in a chunk like that. I mean, if you take that out of his stats, then he's throwing for under 200 yards in this game. And on just barely over 50% completion percentage. Not that I'm that worried about the completion percentage, but it just felt like there was just too many balls that were completable that just did not happen in this game, and that was, I think, frustrating for the Falcons fans to be watching that on TV, and it's something that the Falcons have got to get right because it just feels like it's unsustainable to actually make the playoffs and be as successful as a team as you want to be when the passing game is that hit and miss. So we'll see. We'll see if he's able to play next week. Frankly, he kind of got rolled up on there at the end of the game. I don't remember. I think he had 3 passing attempts after he got rolled up on, none of which looked good, none of which resulted in a positive throw. They were 3 errant balls. I believe it was 3 that he threw after he got rolled up on, where you could see him limping when he got up from that one, wincing in pain. You could see, on the cameras. And so, Kirk Cousins had his helmet strapped and like he was standing right next to Raheem Morris, ready for the word to go run in there. But ultimately, Penix does finish it out, but certainly did not look good there. And that will be something that we're tracking this week. I would have to imagine that is going to affect Michael Penix and his practice preparation. We'll see. I don't want to assume anything, but it just did not look good in that instance. And I gotta say it again about the offensive line. Just did not do a good job. When we talk about some of these inefficiencies in the pass game and the run game, A lot of that is down to, I think, that Penix was getting a little bit skittish, did not quite know where the pressure was going to come from on any given drop back. Felt like it could have come from any given direction. Bryce Huff was having his way with Elijah Wilkinson. Probably one of Wilkinson's worst games, especially in pass protection, since he's been in that right tackle spot. So just a lot of things for this Falcons offense to have to iron out. And it's just disappointing to be talking about this, considering we felt like there was progress made in this respect over the last couple of weeks and the wins that the team picked up against Washington and the Bills. So I don't want to say it's like a doomsday scenario. Obviously, it's just a disappointing loss, but it does feel like after you took 2 steps forward in those 2 wins that you had coming off that terrible Carolina loss, it's again another step backwards. So it's like you are still making progress. Like you made, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But, ultimately you're going to have to, string together more of those steps forward than the team, has been so far this season. And certainly since Michael Penix has taken charge of this offense at the end of last season. So let's talk about the defense a little bit. It was another kind of frustrating to watch this defense. Obviously not as frustrating as it was to watch this team offensively. It was frustrating because you just felt like they were outmanned in one specific area that Kyle Shanahan was just exploiting again and again and again, and that was that interior offensive line or defensive line, whatever you want to say, just that interior front. And Christian McCaffrey was having his way, finding his little gaps in there. And we talked about this on the podcast, and I've talked about it on the radio as well. Is that this is, I think, just going to be something that the Falcons. It's a trade-off that they make in order to create more negative plays, more impact negative plays and tackles for losses. Like we saw these defenders, these defensive linemen getting into the backfield and creating some of those positive for the defense, but negative plays for the offense. But they were getting gashed because they are trying to get upfield. They are trying to penetrate. It really helps on those outside runs, the zone runs. We saw it on the tosses, sweeps that were not really very effective for San Francisco tonight. But on those quick hitting plays right up the middle, they were San Francisco was incredibly efficient in those areas. And Jeff Ulbrich, I think, is going to have to go to the drawing board a little bit to try to see how he kind of fixes the situation. And it's going to be exacerbated by the fact that he, at least for the time being, does not have Divine Diablo, because Divine Diablo went out early in this game with an injured forearm. Don't love the prognosis after the potential prognosis after he went to the x-ray rooms, was what they announced on the broadcast, and then was declared out after an x-ray. So make of that what you will. I don't know if he has a broken forearm. He could he play with a casted up broken forearm? I don't even know what that looks like, but they need him so bad because I hate to say this, because J.D. Bertrand, he went to my high school. You can see that helmet behind me. But he's the only player in the NFL who's made it. The only player who's made it to the NFL from my high school is not good enough. Like I just don't think he's good enough, at least right now. And maybe he can develop, but I don't even know if that's going to be possible for him. He just looks physically outmanned. You can talk about, and what the Falcons love about J.D. Bertrand is like the intangibles, the smarts, the professionalism that he brings, and I'm sure that he is maximizing what he's got, but ultimately what he's got is he does not have length, he does not have strength, he does not have an ability to plug holes. And even he was oftentimes the first one to Christian McCaffrey, and Christian McCaffrey was just knocking him back and getting an additional 3, 5, 7 yards if J.D. Bertrand even continued to have him wrapped up. Oftentimes J.D. was just kind of making the contact but bouncing off and allowing extra yardage, and it was not good. And I think that one of the reasons why they were having so much success running up the middle is because you just did not have the physical presence. I mean, one of the reasons they like the length on these linebackers is because it gives them the ability to just tackle and wrap up better. Just that extra length just gives you an advantage at the point of attack when you're going up against an opponent. It's like, that's why length is important in boxing or any time you're outstretching your arms, is because you have the advantage when you can have that point of force that's before they have it against you. And against J.D. Bertrand, it's just so, I kind of feel bad for him because it's tough. He just does not have the physical tool set that it seems like he needs to be an effective linebacker in this scheme. And so we'll see what the prognosis is on Divine Diablo, because certainly this defense has been very good with him. Obviously, one of the NFL's best, but they just didn't look it tonight, and it was not even a frankly that dynamic of a San Francisco offense, obviously, with a limited quarterback as well in Mac Jones. They don't have, the receivers on the outside. Kendrick Bourne, Juwan Jennings are not like the most dangerous. Juwan Jennings is playing apparently with 5 broken ribs, but these are just guys that are not really at the top of their game right now. And they didn't need to be, because they could just give the ball to Christian McCaffrey, and he was picking up, he was just very efficient with the ball in his hands. And then there was one other frustrating moment of the game for this defense, and it happened late. The team was down. They really needed to keep San Francisco out of the end zone to have a chance to win this game, because of, a positive play, which we'll talk about in a second. They had the 49ers in a great situation. I believe it was 3rd and long. I can't remember what the exact down and distance was, but I believe it was 3rd and over 10 yards. And Jeff Ulbrich, going against what he's done for the majority of the season, I believe rushes 3 and drops 8, and Mac Jones just hits Christian McCaffrey in what seemed to be not a very, not really even challenged. Like, it was just a very smooth, pass up the seam. And it got the first down for San Francisco inside the 5-yard line. They were able to take more time off the clock and ultimately punch the ball into the end zone, which, you could consider controversial considering the way that Christian McCaffrey scores that final touchdown for San Francisco, getting dragged in. And we heard Terry McAuliffe on the broadcast saying that it should have been a 10-yard penalty because if he was getting kind of carried into the end zone by one of his offensive linemen. But just that call is just, I think it's one that Ulbrich is probably going to lay in bed at night and think, man, I should have stuck to my guns and brought the pressure, because it's, Mac Jones is not a mobile quarterback at this point in time. And, it felt like it was one of the things that you could do defensively positively in this game. And again, we talked about the receivers that they've got earlier. You felt like you should trust your defenders, your corners to man up on their receivers. Like that's an advantage for you. If you need to man up like Jesse Bates on Christian McCaffrey, if he's split out in the slot or whatever, you do that, and you take your chances. But ultimately, that's not what they did, and they got burned for it. So lesson learned there. The positive on defense I'm going to take away from this game is Zach Harrison. Just an incredibly powerful player. Explosive player, can just burst into the backfield. And again, I think that this attack style front plays perfectly to his strengths, where he can just be really decisive in what he's doing. And he was the only, well, I don't know if he's the only one, but I know he had 2 tackles for loss and 1 sack. He had the only sack for the Falcons in the game. I believe, on the stats I was looking at on my phone, on the app I use, they had him as having the only 2 tackles for loss. I feel like Sam Roberts or David Onyemata maybe have had one, but maybe it didn't get registered, or it was just a 0-yard gain on those plays. But anyway, Zach Harrison I thought was really good, and I thought he was like the bright spot on this defensive line in this game. And that's about it for the defense. Last thing I want to talk about is obviously special teams. Jamal Agnew, he muffs a kick return, which was frustrating to see in this game. But the good news is that he comes back after the muff and returns one past the 50-yard line, nearly breaks it, and you could really see the speed. And glad to see that. Bradley Pinion was good. San Francisco inside their 5-yard line at one point, had a really nice long punt right to the sideline that the Falcons were able to really flip the fields on. So that was good. He did have one punt that just kind of was not really contestable right into the end zone, which was disappointing. What I really want to talk about on special teams, and what's going to be a talking point, is obviously the last big 4th down attempt for the Falcons late in this game when the game was 13-10 San Francisco. It was kind of funny because Mike Tirico, he says on the broadcast that, the Falcons are in field goal range because the Falcons had the ball on the 35-yard line. I kind of, tweeted out a little snarkily, but it's true. That's like, they're not in field goal range. Not this team. Not with Parker Romo. Not with what this team has seen from its kickers this year. And It shows like Eddie Pinero on the other side makes a 55-yarder, and the Falcons don't have that luxury that they feel confident in their kicker to go out and make that kick. And so what do? They go for it, and controversially, don't make it. Have controversial play call not to have Bijan Robinson on the field for that 4th and 1, et cetera, et cetera. And that's going to be discussed a lot on 92.9 The Game and elsewhere. But I think ultimately, what's concerning about that spot is that you don't have a kicker. You don't have a coach that feels comfortable putting your kicker out there to get 3 points. And yeah, it's a 53-yard field goal. You don't know if you're going to make it, but if you're confident in your kicker, like if you had it, like when Younghoe Koo was, going, Matt Bryant, go through any kicker that you can remember for this Falcons team has really gotten going. Like you trust in that kicker to go out there and tie that game at that point in time. That way, I mean, even if you do go and give up the touchdown that they ultimately do, it's only a 1-score game, and you have the chance to then go drive down the field and tie the game again yourself. And that is extremely concerning because there's just no way you can make the playoffs if that's your kicking situation. And listen, I don't have a great answer. It's not like I know a kicker out there who's like, oh yeah, they can definitely go get this guy and he's going to make the kicks. But I don't know. They gotta figure out something, because you can't just keep going like this. If you're just going to have to go for it in those situations going forward, yeah, you're just not going to be successful. And so that's what leaves me kind of befuddled as like, why is Parker Romo your kicker if you're not willing to put him out there in that situation? By the way, Parker Romo did make his only kick attempt of this game. It was a little short one. But that's the situation the Falcons are in. That's the situation Raheem Morris is in. I think that he's got to kind of have to sit down and even think to himself, or talk to his coaching staff and decide, like, next time we're in this situation, are we doing the same thing? In what situation would we put out our kicker? Just when we're desperate, when we feel like there's no way we can, when the chances of a conversion are far against us? I don't know. But all I know is that if you don't have a kicker that you can rely on to make a 50-yard kick in this league, you're just not going to be successful. So they got to get that figured out, whether that's Parker Romo or Ben Sauls, who's also in camp, or somebody else. So I'm sure there will be more discussion on that later this week, and a lot more that we touched on here on today's show. So thank you guys for tuning in. Leave your rants, your frustrations in the comments below, and like the video if you just want to see more of these videos pop into your YouTube algorithm. I say, like, don't leave a like on it necessarily for us, like leave it for yourself, so that YouTube knows that you want to see more of these types of things and other Falcons creators giving you this kind of content. So thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be check back in later this week after we hear from Raheem Morris, and obviously during training camp, again, paying attention to the status of Penix, his health, what's going on with the kicking situation, all of this really fun stuff before, the Falcons have, I think you could call it a must-win. Like, they've got to beat the Dolphins. You got the Dolphins coming up on Sunday. Now you got to win that game. I mean, because it's a game you have to be winning if you feel like you're a playoff team. So we'll leave you with that. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.